Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with episode number 121 of the podcast. Today is Monday, May 27th, 2024, as I record this. And today we're talking to Dr. Larry James Ford about writing a life history in truth. So, Dr. Ford writes about his experience going through the desegregation process in high school. It's a positive and truthful memoir about his life and experiences. So, it's a really insightful conversation. We talk a lot about where he draws his memories from, where he drew inspiration to write a story such as this, and also dealing with real life people who were and are a part of this story. So it's a really interesting conversation. I think you'll want to stick around for that. First off, you may note that my voice sounds a tiny bit different today. I am actually feeling sick. So, for the past couple of days, I've developed some cold-like symptoms. They're relatively minor, although it did make it sound more like a bass in the choir. So, we're dealing with it as is. For the most part, I'm feeling pretty good, except for my voice sounding like this. I figured there's really no reason to not record my podcast, even though my voice sounds like this. So, I hope you can excuse me. I probably sound like a different person. In any case, in terms of updates this week, a lot has happened and also not very much has happened. So let me explain what I mean by that. So a couple of months, I want to say it was more like 6 to 8 months ago on my podcast. You probably heard me talk about how much trouble the goats were. They're like little toddlers. Sometimes you have to chase them around. They don't really behave the way they're supposed to. No matter how much you train them, they will be trained for that period of time. And then if there's any lapse in that training, so like when we stop milking them for the winter, they go back to their normal and you have to retrain them. And, my wife has, obviously she's 8 months, nearly 8 months pregnant right now. And, with other various things, we're getting older. We're not old, but chasing goats around is the thing that we want to do the least. So that being said, we decided eventually we would work towards getting a cow. And at the time, it seemed like it was going to be quite a while before we were able to get a cow. But this last week, we got a cow. So that is the development here on the Kenner homestead. As you know, we've sold many of our goats. Right now, we just have three does and a buckling and a wether. And then we've got their four babies that are with the doelings, or excuse me, with the does. We're planning on selling all the babies, of course, and then all but two of the does, which we'll keep with this cow. So the cow, she's a little bit older. Her name's Ginger. She's very, very sweet. She's very kind with people. But she is also pregnant to have a baby in August, which is perfect because we are going to be having our baby in July. So that'll give us a month to settle things with our brand new baby before she has her baby and we start milking. So the idea here is we will get a lot more milk in a shorter amount of time. To get 2 gallons of milk per day, we were needing to spend an hour and a half total milking 5 goats twice a day. And that just is, you may think that doesn't sound too long. It's a long time. When you have six little children, almost seven little children, um, to leave them alone for that long is not ideal. Now, yes, there are two of us, but while one milks, the other one is doing chores. And the kids do help, right? The older kids are out with us, but the very little littles can't really leave alone. So, with the cow, we should be able to get double that milk, so near 4 gallons, if not more, in 30 minutes or less, depending on how quickly we can milk her. So each milking session will take 15 minutes or less. At least that's what the previous owner said. So it's just more practical. We're going to get more milk, which we wanted more. We could just not fathom having more goats just so that we could get more milk. It seemed like a wild prospect to us. So thus the cow came. So she's settling in very well. We just got her yesterday actually, but she's not a huge cow. I mean, she's big. She's much bigger than the goats, but in terms of cow, she's medium sized. She's a Jersey, and yeah, like I said, her name's Ginger because she's kind of a gingery color. And that's really the update. Like I said, not a lot has changed because everything else has remained stable. Other than now, I'm trying to figure out how to cultivate our pasture. We have pasture in the back. It just doesn't have water to it, so I have to dig out the gates to our canal so that when the irrigation comes through, I can irrigate it. So it's a little bit of a learning curve because I've never done that before, but got one of the gates dug out today. We've got three more to go, and then I got to set a dam and everything, which I've never done before. So I'm confident that I can learn. I'm not too worried about it, but it's just more things to learn so that we can make sure she gets all the food she needs. We're glad we can actually use the pasture in the back for something, and she'll love the grazing. At least she loved it where she came from. So, other than that, on the homestead front, nothing new. We did set more eggs to hatch. They should be hatching in about 2 more weeks, but the previous batch we had didn't have a super high hatch rate. We're anticipating a similar hatch rate, if not lower, and then we'll just have to purchase the rest of the chickens. Someday we'll be able to figure out the genetics to be able to hatch all of our own eggs to create a closed ecosystem for our homestead. But until then, we will keep leveraging the resources we have around us. And of course, we are getting our meat chickens ordered in. Well, that's not for a few more months. We have to do a little bit later this year because of our baby coming. Let's see. In terms of author news, this last week I had the opportunity to be on a podcast with a couple of my friends at The Author's Dilemma. It's a live podcast that streams every Thursday afternoon. Actually, technically evening. It's 6:30 Central Time. So I was able to join them, and is now recorded and on Spotify and on YouTube at The Author's Dilemma. Put a link in the show notes, but I had a really good time talking about my experience publishing with the children, where I get my inspiration, how I discovery write. We go into that process, and they asked me for some advice that I have to give you on my writing, and how to handle the busyness of everything. So it's a really great conversation. There's some awesome authors and people, so head over there and check that out. It was a great episode. Not a lot other than my Ream subscription. So those of you who are hoping for early access or would like early access to the books that I'm writing, you can get that on my Ream account. So it's reamstories.com/Dan Kenner. So there I'm actually releasing the chapters of Dragon Blooded about twice per month, although I may increase that frequency because the book itself should be published, I'd hope, near the end of summer, beginning of fall. So if that's the case, then I will just mass publish all of them. So if you're interested in reading those, just like I said, head to reamstories.com/Dan Kenner. I am starting to edit Dragon Blooded again, so I'm going through all the line edits, which is not as bad as I thought it would be. I'm hoping to do about an hour per day of editing. That's about the max I can do before my head goes, is about to explode. And I think I'll make a pretty good progress through it. Once I get through and do some more content editing for myself, then really it's just about proofreading and sending it to alpha readers, and then it'll be published ready. I did get a print version of my book. It's not here with me right now. It's in another room. I wanted to review a couple things before I showed it to you, but I'm very, very happy with the cover. If you were part of my email list, then you would have seen the cover. I shared it last week. Actually, it was 2 weeks ago. So pretty thrilled with how it turned out, considering I made that cover myself. I do need to adjust the coloring on it because they came through kind of muted on the print book. And I knew they were going to be muted, just I didn't realize they were going to be that muted. So I have to highlight and increase the lightning on that cover for the print version. I did finish my short story. I already talked about that, but I'm going to wait probably another week or two before I dive back into editing that. And then I'm going to start making a cover for that, just an ebook cover. I don't anticipate printing that until I do the collection of short stories. But I want to get in the habit of making a cover for all the books that I have, either right before I write them or right after I write them, even short stories, because they all need covers, and I need more practice writing my covers. Or excuse me, making my covers. Don't write the covers, although you do have to write the description, and that's my least favorite part. I have noodled around with playing with AI for generating sales descriptions. That's something that I haven't done a lot of. Blurbs are challenging for me. I know some people write their blurbs before they write the book. I'm just not that way. So any assistance I can get on that, I won't complain about. But I haven't done it yet. We'll see if I actually make the time to do that. Other than that, I don't anticipate any other changes. I am making some more progress on the podcast. I've decided to separate things from a social media standpoint. I've just found that my reader audience and the podcast audience, they do align to some degree. So I'll continue talking about both on my podcast. But in terms of social media, it's clear that they're a little bit of a separate audience in some ways. So just to be able to provide a more streamlined focus on the different types of content, I will be separating those out on Instagram and TikTok, and we'll see how it goes. I have to do some production for some of my earlier episodes, which I have not done yet. I will be making videos and uploading those to YouTube, as well as short little snippets to the new Instagram and TikTok accounts. So If you want to follow those, feel free to. They will just be dedicated to the Casual Author podcast content. Of course, if you enjoy the podcast and you want to hear more of it, or you just want to support me, I would very much appreciate it. No pressure, of course. But if you head to patreon.com/the casual author, patreon.com/the casual author, you can join to be a supporter. So it's really just a couple dollars a month. If that's something that you might be able to help me with, and I appreciate that. Obviously, there's no sponsors for this podcast. I just do it because I like to connect with you. I like to connect with different authors. It's a way for me to bring positivity and lightness to being casual authors, which I think many of us are. So yeah, once again, if you'd like to support me, I appreciate that. I will be publishing a Q&A once per month, as well as, if you want to be a super supporter, I will be posting videos about updates on our homestead. So I'll show you videos of the cow, our new cow, and milking the cow, and possibly her birth when it comes around. So all the ins and outs of being on the homestead. That's something that I will be sharing on the podcast Patreon. So once again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll go ahead and shift over to the interview portion with Dr. Ford. How are you doing today, Dr. Ford?
I'm doing just fine, Dan. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me on.
I'm thrilled to have you on. I've got so many questions for you, and looking forward to diving into your story and your book and all the sorts of fun things. Before we get into that, how long have you been writing and publishing?
This is my first work.
Mhm.
I'd been threatening to write for a long time. I was in the public health service a long time ago. I was 27 years old and had a doctor office of my own in a little town in Georgia.
Mhm.
And that I thought was going to be my first book. And I might still write about it, but I always planned on writing something. But no, I'm not a writer. I'm a medical doctor, and that's what I was doing up until about 10 years ago when I started writing this book.
Interesting. So, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So what happened? I retired 10 years ago after I got sick. Okay, and this disease that I have is now being treated by the National Institutes of Health. Thank goodness. And it's so rare. I'm almost certainly the only Black male doctor with this in the entire country. And I may be the only Black doctor in the world with this. So it was very difficult getting it diagnosed, getting it treated. But yeah, I'm on the right course now with the NIH. And actually, about 6 months into the study that I was on, I got up one day and I said, one night, and I said, I think I can write. I think I can finish my book, because I had been sick for like 8 years with this. And this is the kind of illness where, you just don't feel well. You got nausea, you got vomiting, you got aches and pains. You just don't feel well. I got up one night, and I said, I'm going to finish writing this book. This was about 2.5 years ago. And I wrote like a crazy man for about a year and a half. And I just said, I'm going to get this done. So I showed it to the NIH. They were shocked that somebody with this disease could write a book. And the blessings have been flowing ever since.
Well, there's so much to unpack there. Not only did you have this excellent motivation for this book that you've been working on for a long time, but you also had this challenge, which made it difficult to do, but you did it anyway, right? Despite those challenges. So when you started writing this book 10 years ago, what was the original motivation to start the book?
Well, I thought I was going to write something at some point in my life. It wasn't,
Sure.
I wasn't sure it was going to be this book, but I wanted to write about my time in the segregated school system in Maryland. I wanted to write that out kind of as a first person narrative while people like us are still around. But originally, when I started writing, it was just that I was doing something to keep busy. Also, I wanted to tell you, I probably about 9 years ago, I enrolled in a writing class.
Okay.
And it turns out your guys, okay, it was the science fiction folks. And so I was the only nonfiction guy in a fiction room. And I was hearing about, fish that could fly with 5 eyes and propellers. And all. I said, okay. So they listened to what I was writing, and their jaws were like, wow. So we kind of had a little symbiotic relationship there. But yeah, so I've been at this for a bit. What finally pointed me in the right direction was about 8 years ago. I went home to Havre de Grace, Maryland, where the story takes place, and I did some stuff for my mom, painting and whatnot. And so she told me, "Oh, I'm going to get your girls to come over tonight after you paint, fry some chicken." Okay. So mom called the girls. These are women that I went to high school with. And so we started talking, and Barbara worked at the Board of Education. She told me that they had just had an in-service at the Board of Education about the segregated schools, the quote colored schools of Harford County. And these are people at the Board of Education. They didn't know our story.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. They did not know our story. And so I told Barbara for the first time what happened to me in high school because nobody knew. And my mother was out in the kitchen listening, and she was hearing it for the first time too. That was 8 years ago.
Wow. And
Yeah.
so you
So
just thought, I need to tell this because there's people that don't know about the story. It needs to be told.
Well, right. And then once Barbara told me that the people at the Board of Education didn't know the story, I said, no, 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 no. That cannot pass.
Mm-hmm.
And so she sent me 3 volumes of from the Harford County Historical Society. The 3 volumes were on the delay in segregation, in desegregation of the Harford County schools. And it was done by the General Counsel of the Harford County School Board. So Barbara sent me those about a week after I was at my mom's house. And that's the only thing in my life I have stayed up all night voluntarily to read. I just couldn't believe it. My name was in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We were part of the last lawsuit to force the segregation of schools, force the desegregation of the schools.
Right.
And sure enough, Christmas versus Harford County, that's the lawsuit that I was in. And I just said, I guess I'm history. So I guess I better start writing this story.
That's
Because
amazing.
nobody else could write a story like mine. And I don't think what happened to me happened. I'm hoping it didn't happen to too many people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that night at mom's house, that was 40 years later. That was the first time my mother heard of what happened in that book. And she was not happy.
Well, I can imagine. Definitely. Particularly finding out about it so many years later, right?
Right.
Because I'm sure mothers are protective. I've gone through this with my mom as well. Things like, "How wait, you didn't tell me that happened." It's like I didn't think about it at the time, right? But so, did you include stories from classmates as well? Are they aware of this book that you've written, or
Okay.
not as much?
Oh yes.
They
The
are.
classmates that are going the craziest over this book. I don't know if you took a look at it, but chapter 10, is my first year at the white school.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about Long Leg Lee, who started what happened with the music teacher. He also was involved in another caper. And so one of my friends called him up and told him that he's in the book. And he got a hold of me. He sent a couple of copies to his daughter. And it's been a lot of fun. People recognize who they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're very happy that they're in it. And it's just been a wonderful experience reconnecting, with people who I wrote about in the book. In fact, I gave one of my classmates, I wrote the story and I talked to her a little bit because we had a 50th year reunion. And I realized she didn't. I didn't think she realized the story that I wrote about her.
Mm,
And so I asked her. I said, Cindy, do you remember what you did on senior day? And she said, no. I got sick back in the early '80s, and a lot of my memory was taken away.
mm,
So that story, I gave her that memory back, where she saved my butt senior day.
mm.
She had no memory of it at all. And I gave her that memory, and she's just so thankful. And I told her I was very thankful that she saved me too. But yeah, it's just been a wonderful experience like that. People are calling me up and telling me different parts of the book that really spoke to them. That I
Mhm.
didn't really mean it to be anything heavy. I was just writing a story. But yeah, things hit people specifically. Like um, I was the one who chose the basketball theme song.
Mm.
Okay. And people read the book and said, "Oh, you chose that song?" I said, "Yeah, yeah. You actually remember it?" And it was Soul Coasting,
Mm.
a
Uh-huh.
song called Soul Coasting from the late '60s. And so, yeah, little things like that hit people, and yeah, so little bits of grace coming back my way.
I mean, I love that. So this was a number of years ago, not very many years ago, right? Because you're still a young man, right?
No, I'm
But
not young.
just teasing. How do you remember a lot of the things that happened? Are these just things that were burned into your memory, or do you have like journals that you were pulling from as you were
No,
writing these stories?
no, it's just my memory.
Awesome. That's very cool.
When I got sick um, from this weird thing that the NIH takes care of, one the disease is so it just takes over your body, your
Mm,
mind, everything. So you need to go talk to a shrink to make sure you got that you're on with the program and that you're not playing. So I walk in to talk to my shrink, and I have a jazz book in my hand,
okay.
you know, like a jazz song book with all the letters and
Yeah.
stuff. And so he asked me, he said, "Do you always do the hardest thing?" And I said, "Not on purpose, but yeah, I'm not afraid of doing hard things." So he said, "Do you get bored if things are easy?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, let me think about it." So I talked to him the next week, and he told me basically what you have, what I have, and what I've been fighting since elementary school is ADD.
Hmm.
So that's basically the first part of the book and the last part of the book too. I'm fighting. I don't know what it is. I didn't know what it was until about 7 years ago.
Mm,
So getting ill helped me understand that, and I needed to know that to write the book. I needed to know what was going on with me in elementary school because you can tell I don't tell people a lot of stuff. Okay, I just say, okay, this is what I have to go through, and I go ahead and go through it. I don't
hmm.
ask people for help, their permission, or anything. But yes, the whole thing, what I was dealing with then and now, was ADD. And
Hmm.
what my psychiatrist told me is that ADD is not all negative. If you can get out of childhood, you have a pretty good chance of living an interesting profitable life.
Hmm.
What people with ADD have, what my psychiatrist told me is what we do have positively is about, I don't know, 30, 40 times normal random access memory
Hmm.
of the human brain. So I remember stuff that used to scare my mother. Okay, she goes, the specific story was this, and in the book I talk a little bit about it, but I said this is maybe 15 years ago when I'm writing, maybe 7, 8 years ago. I said, "Mom, did we live beside Sam Cooke's girlfriend?" And she looked at me and she goes, "You remember that?" And I said, "Yeah." So the whole story, Sam Cooke used to sing gospel.
Hmm.
And so before he got real popular, he was singing and going around. And so mom wanted to borrow some sugar from our next door neighbor when we were living in Albany, Georgia. And she said she went over there and Sam Cooke was at the breakfast table.
Hmm.
And she must have told me that. I don't know how, but she cleaned it up a bit. Okay. So, so when she told me later, she told me the whole story. But she was shocked that I remembered that because I must have been 3, maybe. And there's a story in the book where I'm 3 years old, the story about the um, bus driver catching my sister in the doors of the school bus. I remember that. And someone asked me, "Did somebody tell you that?" I said, "No, I remember." But yeah, so my memory, I remember things back when I was 2 and 3.
Wow.
I moved out of Albany, Georgia when I was 4 and a half, and I have lots of memories of living back
That's very cool. Well, and it makes for a very rich experience for the reader if you can access all these really
there.
almost random but amazing details about
Yeah,
things
yeah,
as you're
yeah,
writing
yeah.
this book.
It's pretty. Yeah, my memory is something else. That's the one thing that I have that I will brag on a daily basis.
Hmm.
And it was fun writing the book and fun seeing the reaction of the folks who realized that I really put a lot of detail in things
Hmm.
that happen. Yeah.
Have you run into anybody who has been unhappy with the things that you put in or
You know
not
what?
yet?
I have not personally run into anybody
Okay.
who has been unhappy with what I wrote. The the closest thing to a negative comment, Barbara, who was in the book several times, she was my neighbor,
Hmm.
and I wrote a story about um, almost getting beat up in the 6th grade. And
Mm.
I actually talked to one of the guys who's going to beat me up. He lives in Australia now. He goes, "Oh, I'm sorry." I said, "That's okay." But Barbara and I are friends and neighbors, and that was it in 6th grade. So the boys thought I had sat by Barbara on the bus coming
Mm.
home, and they didn't like that. So they surrounded me in the bathroom, pushed me around a little bit, and told me they didn't want me sitting by Barbara. So Barbara had no idea about this until about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I told her, she goes, "What?" I said, "Anyway, it turns out that Barbara's ex evidently read the book and did start giving her a hard time about having an affair with me in the 6th grade, which is crazy." But I haven't had any seriously negative comments.
I mean, whether or not you have, at the end of the day, it's great that you wrote the book, and it's important to keep to, your experience. I mean, you have the right to write your experience and tell the things that happen, whether or not people are unhappy. I was mainly just curious because, with these historical books, I've heard of other people who have done similar things, and someone didn't like the way they were portrayed, or yada yada yada. So I was
Well.
curious.
I'm. I have time. I have one guy who I'm pretty sure is gonna, if he's still alive, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna hear some negative stuff from him. But
Mm,
this particular guy, um, my classmates who have read the book said, "Larry, you really nailed him."
hmm. That's funny.
So he basically, he could have been nicer to me, but he wasn't. So
Mm. And now it's written in history, right?
well, now, yeah, now it's written in history, and people know. Well, I named him, and also
Yeah.
even if I didn't name him, people from the school would have known exactly who I was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really cool and bold move to name everybody. I've heard of historical, um, representations of, people write their histories and whatnot, but they change
Mhm.
names I don't know
Well,
why, because they feel like it. But
mhm. well, I didn't necessarily use the first and last names
sure.
of my classmates. Like Lee, I called him Long Leg Lee because he's 6'5".
Right. Right.
And everybody knew who he was. Or Sandy with the big blue eyes. Everybody
Hmm.
knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, I still think that's amazing, and it's really cool. Did you find yourself enjoying the experience while writing, or was it painful to write in
It
some
was painful.
instances?
It was painful. partially because I was sick. I mean, I
Right.
wasn't the best of conditions, and I was absolutely determined that I was going to get this done, even if it killed me,
Hmm.
and it almost did. um, this uh, disease that I have, one of the things that can happen is you can just go into anaphylactic shock.
Oh my word.
Sometimes for a reason, sometimes for no reason. But when I was really uh, enjoying the book. I mean, I was writing stuff I hadn't thought about for a while, and I went down to NIH, and I caught a cold,
Mm.
and I try not to get infected with anything ever because that can really be a problem. So what happened was I got sicker and sicker and sicker, and finally I went into what I think was an episode of anaphylactic shock, and I saw the lights to the other side. I knew what was happening at the time. It was, and for a doctor to know what is going on in that situation, the scariest thing is that I was really calm.
Mm.
Okay. And once I realized what was going on, I pulled myself up just before I started vomiting. And if I'd been vomiting while I was on my back, I might not be here.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy. It
Yeah.
definitely
But this is,
brings, please.
yeah, this is the kind of thing. See, that was the first one that I'd ever had. But most people with this have those things like every now and then. Some people have them several times a month.
Oh my gosh.
I I am not very sick from this disease, which I think is amazing to my doctors at NIH. But the last thing I'll tell you about this disease that I kind of knew intuitively, but NIH confirmed it. The reason why I am the only black male doctor in the whole country with this disease is because the gene is a European gene that causes
Mm,
this. So it had to come from slavery.
interesting.
Yeah. So I'm walking around with the disease every day that came from slavery. And I'm on Ancestry trying to, it's like a mystery. I'm trying to
Yeah.
find out who it was, right? And I'm narrowing it down. And you have to go back to uh, uh, fourth, fifth, and sixth grandfathers.
Hmm.
And so one of them showed up on Ancestry, and he was a preacher, a reverend. And he was born in 1697.
Okay.
Okay, and um, uh, that's a pretty good suspect. That's on my father's side, but I also suspects on my mother's side too. So I'm not sure I'm ever really going to be able to pin it down. But it definitely came out of slavery. And what NIH told me is that given the peculiar genetics of this disease, and in fact, it's just rare. It's only 30,000 people in the whole country with it. I might be the only black doctor in the whole world with this disease. And that's what NIH told me. So they're probably right.
But they definitely have access to a lot more data than we do.
Well, they also know my entire DNA
Hmm.
sequence because they looked at it and they started telling me about the European part of me and the
Mm,
Native American part of me and the West. So they know.
yeah.
Yes.
Very, very interesting. Well, I'm curious to know in terms of the actual writing process, because you started writing this book 10 years ago. And everybody that I've talked to who's written a book over a long period of time, they go on and off of writing it. And they reach a point where, they kind of get it done. But I'm curious to know, how much of it had you done, at the beginning stages of that 10 years versus what you kind of pumped out at the end? Did you do
You
most of
know,
it in the last couple of years, or
no,
had you done a lot
no,
already?
no. I had done a lot already,
Okay.
and I would write for a couple of months, and I'd be sick for 4 or 5 months.
Mm,
I
yeah.
would write for 3 4 weeks, and I'd be sick for 4 or 5 months.
Mm,
And so it just kind of went on like that. And when I got most of the book done and started editing it, I could tell my state of health by my writing. I was really sick that first the first 6 chapters, and I can tell it, and I can tell when I was feeling better. I said, "Oh, I think they must have given me the medicine right about here." And yeah, so toward the end, I was working with a really good brain. Okay,
Hmm.
from a chapter 9 on, actually, and I was having a good time because I was going back into my memory. I could just remember just really deep things, and even conversations. And so I was enjoying writing that because I was thinking that not everybody can do this. Okay, I mean, and to have the time, like you have what, 4 or 5 jobs, right?
I mean, technically.
Yeah, technically. So I didn't have 4 or 5 jobs. My job was um, to keep alive and to finish this story. Okay. And so it just became more and more interesting to me because the meat of the story was written during COVID lockdown.
Mm,
Okay. And so I wasn't talking to anybody, I wasn't seeing anybody. I literally wrote the book to the voice in my head.
right.
Okay. The voice in my head that I said at one point, maybe trying to sashay off on his own.
Well,
It seemed to have a different personality. It always has been. This is even before I knew I had ADD, but I knew I had somebody else inside me.
yeah, which does make it a lot more interesting too, right? I am curious to know. Everybody has a different writing process, but from your perspective, did you I mean, because this is a history, so you're just writing the experiences as you remember
It's
them.
sort of a timeline.
Yeah, okay. So was it like chronological as you wrote it, or did you kind of
Yeah.
skip around in your
No,
history and write it?
no, I knew it was chronological, right? But I don't have that kind of brain. All right.
Sure,
So
fair
I get
enough.
bored very easily. So I may have been working on chapter 6 and then say, I want to go and work on the last chapter.
Hmm.
So I go work on the last chapter because I knew what was going to happen. Now that really helped because I'd be working on the last 3 chapters and then recognize that there was a connection back to the fourth chapter.
Mm,
That happened a couple of times. I said, "Oh wow, I didn't see that." Yeah, so I didn't write the book in an orderly fashion because my brain doesn't work in an orderly fashion. That would be very boring. So I'd write 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 sections at a time and find out that they were related
that's
in a
very
way
cool.
that I had planned. Yeah.
I love that you're hearing your experience of this because you are surely not the only person who is writing or has written who is experiencing, ADHD symptoms or ADD
Oh no,
symptoms.
no,
And
it's very common. Yeah.
it's very, I think there's a lot of authors
Yeah.
for whatever reason, right? Maybe people with these challenges just gravitate towards writing.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know what tactics you used to do the boring parts, right? Because everything about writing isn't always exciting.
No.
Sometimes, in my opinion, editing is boring. I
Mm-hmm.
I struggle
Mm-hmm.
to edit because I find it very boring. So,
Mm-hmm.
how did you get yourself to do those boring parts?
You know, when you go to medical school, you get used to doing stuff that you don't want to do.
True. Fair enough. Yeah.
So I don't really think about it. It's just like I have to get this done, and
Okay.
I could have a fight with myself, but if I was that kind of person, I probably would have never gotten through college or medical school.
True.
But
Yeah, that's a very good point.
everybody has their own way of dealing with it, and I've talked to ADD people who are just shocked that I could finish anything.
Mm,
They said, "You finished a book?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." I said, "Yeah, I actually did. I patted myself on the back and everything." But um, I'm very fortunate because when I was growing up in the late '50s, nobody knew about ADD.
hmm.
You were just bad, and a lot of um, the juvenile delinquents stealing hubcaps in the late '50s and early '60s probably had ADD.
Yeah, it's
A good
possible.
number of them probably did. Yeah, because it just wasn't something anybody. So my doctor was just really impressed. He goes, "How? What exactly did you do?" I said, "Well, what I knew is that I had a reading problem in the
Right.
fifth grade. So I read. So I read the entire World Book Encyclopedia between the fifth and the ninth grades, and I still remember some of the pages." And that made a big difference because, again, with that random access memory ability, which I didn't know about at the time. But yeah, it was pretty obvious that I actually lived off my random access memory probably until the 10th grade, until I really figured out how to do it.
Hmm. That's very, very interesting. So with that, operating off of that random access memory, particularly in your writing, um, did you take a lot of notes as you were writing? Did you like keep your place? It was just kind of you just wrote it. Kind
That's
of
right.
that's very cool. I mean, that's a really, I'm sure, cathartic experience to be able to just sit down and
Yeah.
write and then
Yeah, and I could literally just pick out a chapter and
mhm,
just start writing in that chapter.
that's
And
awesome.
I didn't really think anything of it. Like my shrink told me the his biggest problem with me is that I thought everybody could do what I did, what I could
Mm,
do. He goes, and not everybody can do that.
hmm.
Yeah, and you should maybe appreciate some of the abilities you have, and I do, especially after writing that book. I mean, writing a book is really difficult.
Hmm.
It is just really hard. It's not something that most people would even think about trying, much less completing. But it's just such a satisfying feeling when you think you have made the points that you wanted to make in a cogent way.
Hmm.
And I got to use some nice words because I love words. Always have been a word person, and I used all those things at my disposal, plus the internet, you know, to find out things that maybe I'd heard about growing up, but didn't know a lot of detail. And specifically, what I'm talking about, I think it's chapter 10, uh, Coatesville and Mr. Bill. And Coatesville is a town in Pennsylvania, right across the Mason-Dixon line, where they had a horrible lynching in the early 1900s. And my uncle used to tell me about it, but he'd never tell me the whole detail because I'm sure he didn't
Right.
know all of it. And so, sure enough, I found it on the internet and learned about the whole thing and wrote about it.
I mean, the internet is a very amazing resource, and it can also be
Yes,
a
yes, the
time
Wild
suck.
West. Yeah.
The Wild West. That's a good way to put it. But, I mean, there's not a better time to do what you did, to write, that history and be able to put the time into it. And I think it's amazing that you've done that. Do you have plans to write more, like a continued history
You know
or
what? I don't have any plans, but other people do. So
right.
every
Yeah.
my my second grade 105-year-old second grade teacher, um, I read part of the story I wrote about her. This is like 3 years ago to her, and I finished the story, and it was very quiet in the room. And I said, "You okay, Ms. Hart?" Now, this is my 105-year-old second grade teacher. The first thing she told me when she opened her eyes, okay, and recovered from the words I wrote, first thing she told me was, "You have two more books to write."
Oh, okay.
Yeah. and, and I think I can probably crank out one more. Um, two, I don't think so. I don't think so. But there's one other good. Well, there's a couple other good stories. Um, but if I'm gonna do it, I need to start it this year.
Then get started, right? No,
That's right.
that's
That's right. That's right. What are you doing talking to me?
no, it's easier said than done. I think that's the greatest thing about creativity is, at least for me, it's also a little bit unpredictable, right? The
Yeah.
creative surges, and if this is the same as you, the creative surges can be so amazing, but the
Absolutely.
creative valleys, ooh,
Yeah.
it's rough.
I didn't get many valleys. I
Oh,
really didn't.
good.
But
That's good.
that was probably because I had a story laid out in chronological
True.
order. All I had
That's
to do
fair.
was not screw it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
So I pretty much knew, but those creative. I had a scary one once. My brain was hitting on cylinders that I didn't know it had.
uh-huh.
I just was remembering things, and things were just so clear. And I'm a terrible typist. Okay.
Okay.
I can't type stuff fast. Okay, so I have my tape recorder, and if I want to say something real quick before that wonderful thought leaves my brain forever, I'll have that or a piece of paper or whatever. But most of the time, I can remember it and just write from memory most.
Hmm. I mean, that's so cool. And I think the most important thing is just to recognize how you felt while doing it, right? I know
Mhm.
there's a lot of authors who, if you're in a place where writing feels horrible, you hate it, you dislike
Mhm.
it, then maybe
Mhm.
reevaluate, be like, what can I change? You know, is there something
Mhm.
I can shift to make it a better experience for myself? And obviously that's different per person.
Mhm. Mhm.
But, I think it's great that you did put together this story and now you have plans to write two more books, according to your
One,
second grade teacher.
one.
I am just kidding.
One more book, but I'm not going to tell her the numbers one.
Right, and you can do a two-part book,
Well,
right?
this 105-year-old teacher, I didn't tell you that about 3 years ago, she published a book. So
Okay,
she doesn't want to hear any excuses from me.
yeah, fair enough. That's awesome. I mean, I love just how accessible it is for people to be able to write and get their works out, tell their stories, or whether it be history or fantasy or sci-fi about flying fish with five eyeballs. I think it's great that we have the accessibility to do so. So I hope that you do write more, and that you're able to do that.
Yeah, I will be able to get one more out. Because after a while, when I was writing during COVID lockdown, and
Hmm.
I'd look forward to I'd get up at midnight and I'd write till 4 in the morning,
Wow.
and I couldn't wait for the next morning because I wanted to see what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, on a nonfiction story, that's a pretty amazing thing when you're
Hmm.
not exactly sure how you're going to tell it.
Yeah.
Because I could have told it 3 or 4 different ways.
That's true. Yeah.
I said,
But
okay,
it,
so it's turning out this way.
yeah. But you have that creative flexibility. And you've said that, and I do that all the time, right? I'm often excited to write my story because I don't know where it's going and I'm excited to find out where it's going. Mine isn't a history though, right? Mine is a completely made up fantasy story or sci-fi or whatever it is I'm writing. Um, but I think it's cool that you put it in that perspective because you're right. The history is the way it is in our memories, but it can be written and told in many different
Oh,
ways.
well, yeah.
And
I gave a speech for a talk for Black History Month
uh
um, in the town that I live in, and it was my first foray into the public. Well, that was second actually, but it's the first talk, and I kept getting, or I afterwards, I got a lot of comments about my demeanor,
okay.
and the comments were that I wasn't mean at all when I had every right to be.
Yeah.
I heard that from several women that I just wasn't mean and nasty, and I thought about it, and even at the time it was going on, like I wasn't livid, looking for somebody to throw into the river or whatever. It was more, these people are doing exactly what I expect them to do and what I
Yeah.
was warned they would do. So it
Okay.
wasn't a surprise at all. So
Right.
basically, I just had to figure out what I was going to do, how I was gonna respond to something that I knew was coming. I didn't know it was coming in that form necessarily,
Hmm.
but I knew it was coming. So it wasn't a surprise. It wasn't anything to get really upset, mad about. It's just something I had to deal with.
Mm.
And yes, I did enjoy messing with them. I did. Whenever I had a choice, I had a chance. to really um, um, expose my teachers, my principal, um, as the bigots that they were. Yeah, I did, because it was just ridiculous the kind of things that um, a person like me had to go through back then. Now,
Mm,
all I was trying to do was get through school.
right.
And what my principal and some other folks decided is, I don't know, maybe I was too surly,
Mm,
or maybe I was not impressed with them, which I was not. And I was pretty much on my own because I enjoyed doing stuff on my own. So
right.
I didn't need them for anything except to give me the correct grade, which they decided. Well, even when they gave me the correct grade, there was some sort of rider attached to it. Okay, so in the 11th grade, I got a 4.0 average when 4.0 is really meant a 4.0. Okay, but I thought that would perhaps make my guidance counselor look at me a little differently. But no, it was a colored 4.0. So as far as she was concerned, I could take my 4.0 and I could go to any colored college in the county, in the country, because that's where she said I belong. Okay, now
Mm,
made it a little difficult because while they were trying to send me to a nice colored college, okay, Senator Tidings of Maryland, he was a senator in the 60s, nominated me to the Air Force Academy
okay.
on my own. Okay, and so here my school is saying, no, no, you can go to a junior college, maybe a black school, but not even the University of Maryland. And boom, I got into the Air Force Academy.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, yes, I had a good time stuffing that in their face. Yeah, I did, because
I'm
I'm that
sure.
kind of guy.
I'm sure. Well, I mean, once again, it's history, and live the life you wouldn't mind being recorded, right? That's why
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's
yeah.
things people forget about is, anything is open to be written, and what you do, how you react to other people, will be remembered by them forever. So
Yep, that's
try
right.
to live a good life.
I'm
So
sort of getting the final word.
yeah. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. We are running a little short on time, but before we end here, where can people find more information about you and your book, C is for Colored?
Okay, I'm on Amazon. You just type in to Google Dr. Larry James Ford,
Mhm.
not that maniac. Okay, then it will come up. And Amazon, sometimes they don't take you exactly to the right book, but if you type in Dr. Larry James Ford, a lot of the mischief will be taken out of it.
Perfect. I actually will make sure to put the link directly in the show notes so people can click on it and go directly to the book. So, but yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you very much for having me, Dan.
I hope you found that insightful, and just learning from Dr. Ford's wisdom is so appreciated. He has just a very grounded view of life and of his history, and really looking forward to diving into his book more, and I hope you are as well. Next week, we will be talking to Herman Stuernagel about paving the way for your authoring. Herman is also a podcast host over the greatest podcast in the multiverse, and I definitely want to point out that his podcast is doing very well, and he talks to sci-fi and indie authors, excuse me, sci-fi and fantasy authors about their books and where their inspiration came from and everything to that degree. So if you'd like to join me on the podcast, or if you have friends that might be interested, head to thecasualauthor.com, fill out the pitch form, and I'd love to have you. If you have any inspiration or insight related to publishing, even if you're not a writer, if you're an editor, cover designer, artist, whatever, I'd love to join you and hear more about your story. So thank you again for joining today, and I look forward to talking to you next week.